Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here today. My name is Ben Conlon. I'm an application engineer at Ansys, and I'm here to talk through the digital transformation of healthcare. I'll go through a demonstration that we have, walk you through some of the process and tools that we have here at Ansys, as well as just general concepts related to the idea of the digital transformation of healthcare and how we can think about it and understand it as we move forward in kind of this next transition in industry. So just a brief agenda for what we're going to be talking through in terms of the digital transformation of healthcare. We're going to walk through some of the ideas and details that are going on in regards to healthcare and how some of the processes and mechanisms by which things are accomplished are changing. We're also going to walk through a couple of platform tools from Ansys that can enable digital transformation. Then we will walk through a couple case studies that we've built out showing how you can link together various parts of a process, focused in this case around materials and reporting, to be able to kind of discuss and have an understanding of how these things can work together in a way that's cohesive and can support the creation of a digital thread or aid in the concept of digital transformation. So just in general, there are some significant challenges that exist to deliver future medical technology. You're always trying to optimize on things like performance. You want to be able to make sure that your time to market is fast and can increasingly get faster, and also that your costs can go down. You never really want a high cost of a project. Medical products can be very expensive to produce, so having a shorter time and cost window will are very powerful in enabling these things to happen. You also have to deal with the idea of extreme reliability, patient safety, and trying to accelerate the idea of a development cycle or regulatory approval, all while maintaining all of the information and things like biocompatibility, electrical safety, making sure that you don't have fatigue in relation to both patient use as well as the device itself. All of these things are important that we have to be able to consider as we continue to advance the idea of medical technology. And healthcare is really undergoing a transition fundamentally from this one size fits all approach to being able to look at outcomes based personalized medicine. I mean, how many people have something like a smartwatch on their wrist that can tell you your heart rate, potentially, eventually your glucose levels, or any sort of arrhythmia that's going on? We're going from looking at everything as a single idea to being able to look at it from a personalized perspective, and that's going to have to change some of the ways that we think and work, particularly on a digital front. So there's also, some ideas of how can we move from traditional sources of evidence, be it benchtop testing, animal, or even clinical trial testing, into the realm of digital evidence, where we can use some of these factors as a way to build up our digital evidence. And then enable us to kind of speed through some of this regulatory process, this approval chain, but also be able to use digital resources to de-risk processes, go through design iterations faster and in a way that is effective and can kind of benefit from all the technologies that we've seen other industries benefit from. So we have seen some success at Ansys with this idea. We've been able to, for in this case, this is looking at, being able to release a new pacemaker. We can reduce the number of patients involved in a clinical trial, in this case by 256 people. The total cost of the production of this device was around 10 million. We were able to close the design cycle down to 2 years earlier than it was expected. And it, those 2 years increased the number of patients that it can serve, that it could serve by 10,000. So all of the factors that we've just talked about in regards to digital transformation, if we're able to enact and initiate some of these ideas, you see that there are tremendous benefits that can exist. Um, so just looking at, the various verticals in which medical devices exist, right? We have medical devices as we think of them conventionally via something like a implantable, but there's also the idea of supplies and hospital equipments, even the idea of pharma and biopharma. So being able to rapidly produce drugs and scale things up is critical. I mean, we all have lived through this COVID-19 pandemic, and being able to understand and appreciate how we can use simulation or digital processes is important to speeding along these processes, as well as even on a clinical sense, being able to do some sort of imaging technology and compare it to models that may exist is important and powerful as we move forward. And Ansys is already pervasively used throughout the healthcare industry. I'm presenting this as a way of indicating that, there is the idea of having the digital tools within the healthcare industry. And what we want to talk through today is how we can use some of those tools to facilitate processes that are commonly done in the healthcare space. And some of the impact that goes on in terms of medical device development is that by using simulation early on, you can have up to 90% increased accuracy. You can accelerate a development timeline by months, and you can, of course, lead to major cost savings on a project or a program. But one other thing that we want to talk about today, which is very critical, is the concept of legislations, particularly their impact on substances. So there have been a number of legislations that have been passed globally, restricting the use of substances within materials and other details like that. And one of the biggest legislations that's coming up in the healthcare space is EU MDR, or the EU Medical Devices Regulation, which is actually set to be deployed this month. So what this is going to do is it's going to be effective in the European Union, and it's going to be replacing a medical devices directive that already exists. But there's going to be the inclusion of a list of restricted substances that require justification and labeling. They're going to exist in a device, and any new product that's going to be sold in the EU will have to make this EU MDR justification. So this is a new legislation that needs to be tracked, managed, and be able to have it as a factor in your approval process. Going along with the idea of legislative impacts, something that can be helped and managed via digital tools, we also are trying to enable better communication of data through some of these digital resources. So there are platform tools that can facilitate this, and they can facilitate not only all aspects of the medical device simulation, but also generating reports to be able to submit to regulatory and legislative bodies about a device, be it a design history file or a compliance report. So being able to capture a medical device's materials data in particular, which is what we're going to focus on today, as well as any simulation results associated to it, will enable us to have traceability on multiple levels that are necessary in the medical device industry to meet the legislative burden that we have to deal with, as well as having traceability down to simulation and product level. So that's where materials come in. That's what we're talking about as kind of the next step for digital transformation. We're going from doing things in a lot of by hand and rough practice sort of way to now we use tools like CAD, simulation, and CAM for manufacturing. We have a tool like Grant.mi, which is one of the platform tools we'll talk through today, that walks through materials information technology as a means to facilitate this digital transformation in a material sense. What's the goal of kind of what we're trying to show here, right, is that materials information exists in many forms throughout the product lifecycle, and typically they're managed in different ways. And a lot of times that looks something like this, where they're managed in a variety of Word, PDF, Excel documents. And what Grant.mi and a lot of these materials information tools, what we're seeking to do is be able to manage this information in a concise and an impactful way that enables you to use it in your digital transformation initiatives. So why do materials lag behind might be a question you're asking, right? We already use CA simulation and CAD for a lot of digital design, as well as things like PLM. Well, a major factor is that materials are kind of uh, complex, right? The domain is spread across a lot of different areas. There's a lot of different moving parts, be it aesthetic reasons versus engineering properties. And that ownership leads materials to be seen as a cost center and not something that's necessarily at the peak of innovation. But that's changing with some of the new technologies that exist, be it additive manufacturing or the concept of ICME, as well as the amount of data that's being generated around materials. There's also the legislative initiatives that we spoke of earlier, which are promoting the idea of having to manage these materials in a digital sense to be able to support a lot of these digitalization initiatives. And our mission is to be able to facilitate this growth of materials into the digital space and help to enable the types of advances that we've been talking about, as particularly in the medical device industry. We're also going to walk through the concept of simulation process and data management, which is around enabling you to take the various aspects, be it a fluid simulation, be it a mechanical simulation of a particular component or a device, and enable you to manage and do pervasive simulation across all of those regimes, keeping a digital thread in a fast and efficient way, synchronizing all the data between them, and connecting it to systems, be it CAD, PLM, or CAE tools. And so the idea here behind this process that we're going to walk through is enabling us to manage not only the simulation side of device development, but also the material side of being able to use and utilize materials in an effective way. So what are some of the outcomes of this idea of SPDM with a tool like Ansys Minerva? It can accelerate your product time to market, similar to the other digital transformation ideas that we talked about, reducing development and manufacturing costs. You can do more digital development and less testing and less physical actual problems with manufacturing, and that can lead to an improvement in product quality and eliminating risk in all sorts of aspects of the product development process. So the next step that we're going to walk through is going through a couple of case studies involving two tools from the platform that are focused around the idea of digital transformation. That's going to be Ansys Grant to MI and Ansys Minerva. So we're going to walk through a workflow of how we would go through qualifying a material and how we can use these platform tools to facilitate this. So the first workflow is around materials data management. So the idea is, how are we going to ensure that in a highly regulated environment with organizations like the FDA or EUMDR, that we can trace material data down to machine calibration levels, that we can easily resolve supplier issues if a supplier changes or a standard changes that we need to use in our device. So this is the demo workflow that we're going to go through, which is assigning a material in CAE, and then of course capturing the test data associated with it, being able to do some analysis and calibration in regards to our material model, assessing is this material compliant on a regulatory level, and then moving forward into actually doing our CAE material assignment again. And the question that we typically like to ask is, how is somebody doing these processes now? A lot of times it's Excel files, a lot of times it's email chains, and that can lead to a lot of complications, particularly when you have to go in front of either a legislative body or make a really, difficult decision in the design process. So the first step is just assigning a material. How can I assign a material and with traceability in mind, and what does that mean? So we're just going to go into what's called a gateway. So you can actually go directly within your CAE simulation tool and be able to assign a material for use in simulation. So we're starting here in Ansys Workbench. You'll see that we've actually linked the MI Materials Gateway into our Workbench project, and we've assigned materials that we know and that we've qualified before to the rods in this implantable. This is actually a spinal implant that we're modeling right here. So we have the actual rods, and then we have these test blocks, which are made of some arbitrary polymer. And we're just using them as a way of figuring out what the maximum deformation and maximum stress are. You can visualize them here. So the process that we're going to go through is looking at the maximum deflection for each of these rods, as well as the materials that were assigned to them, and then being able to qualify a new material that may be used in these rods. So here we note the maximum deflection and maximum stress. And as we continue on, we're going to have to actually assign a new material and go through the qualification process for a new material. So when we say traceability, what we mean is the idea of being able to go throughout a process from design data. This is data that would be used in your simulation or CAD tools, all the way back through a statistical rollup that consists of many tests of many different types of material of this, to be able to build up your understanding and being able to track that statistical rollup down to the individual component tests that were used to actually kind of develop the statistical level. And then from there, being able to go to pedigree or even as received data from a manufacturing lot. So when we say traceability, what we mean is being able to justify and understand all of these decisions down to an individual lot or batch level, which can have, profound implications in regards to how you design a statistical process control or tolerances in relation to a device. And so what we're going to see here is how you can actually visualize that within the granted database. You'll see we're looking at a design data. We're going to take a look at this. This is data that's approved for end users. We're going to filter down through to statistical data, which is going to be the next phase of our discussion. And this statistical data consists of properties that have been rolled up from constitutive individual tests. So we can look at each of the properties that are necessary. We can look at their summary statistics. We can look at a graph, which is a kind of an average of this particular set of information. Here we have relevant statistical information that's of importance to us. Again, something that can be powerful is being able to really quickly generate SPCs from this data, and that's something that's built into the concept of the digital transformation and the digital backbone for concepts like your materials data or in a medical device. So now let's just jump back here really quickly. Now what we're looking at is the actual test data for an individual tensile test that was captured that's then rolled all the way back up into a final design data file. So what we're going to do now is just flow through the process of rolling that up. We're going to go from our individual tensile test, where we can actually look at and store the data, and of course run any type of analysis that we want on this. and then roll that back up through our statistical data, and then from there back up to our design data. So you'll see that we'll just roll up through statistical data, and then from there go right back up to design data. Also noting that we have some other types of data that might be applicable that could be linked to this data as well. So we just looked at a material that was assigned. Now let's look at validating material from a new supplier, right? So we can think of this process as starting from a raw material, going through the testing necessary, doing a statistical analysis, having that be brought into our material database, analyzing it for restricted substance, running some simulation, and then being able to move it over to manufacturing. So in the rest of this process, we're going to use Granta MI as a platform tool to facilitate the digitalization of this materials data. We're going to use Ansys Workbench as our simulation tool, and we're going to use Ansys Minerva as a way of capturing this entire process and communicating it to anybody that needs to have access to it. So if we take a look at how we actually capture this data, can I easily capture and validate this? What we're going to do is you can take data in a variety of formats, any basically machine readable text-based format. And there's a tool that enables us to bring that easily into our database called MI Remote Import. So the next phase of what we're showing here is just the ability to use tools that organizations commonly use, like Excel. That's what we're going to use in this instance. We're just going to take some basic Excel files that might be generated from a test. In this case, it's a tensile test, and we're just going to be able to easily import them, drag them, drop them in to this particular remote import instance. And this is going to automatically create a number of files for us that allow for us to store and manage the data that is important to us. In this case, it's part of an ongoing validation effort of a new material. We're trying to digitalize this process and enable us to have the traceability down to this very finite granular level. So if we go ahead and take a look at what some of these files look like, you'll see that they are very simple, and they're common files that people would use in a daily on a daily basis. And these can be generated either from Granta, or there's actually the capability to use tests that are already kind of generated from an organization. So we've found a lot of people have Excel files, and they're easy to adapt to that drag and drop interface for the information that's necessary. You'll see that there's 6 new records created. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at what those records look like. They're going to be very basic. The reason they're going to be basic is we just imported the raw tensile curve. We really don't have any information about Young's modulus, so we're going to use a digital tool to enable us to do that through one of the Granta MI tools. So what we're going to do now is just extract some of these material parameters. We're going to take the information out from the Granta MI database in an automated way. And we're going to use, in this case, Python, but we could easily use Excel to do the same sort of functionality to calculate some of the parameters that are important to us, and then give that back into our Granta MI database. Let's roll through this process. So what we're looking at right now are those 6 files that we had earlier. They all have their tensile curves brought in, and because we have we have gone through the process of digitalization, you can compare that to the other data that we had for other material. And all we're going to do now is run a really simple Python script to be able to pull the relevant parameters that are important to us off of these tensile curves, and then add them back into our records in Granta MI. So all of the data within Granta is Python accessible. Something that's very important, right, is to enable your digital tools to be able to use and utilize, not just for processes like this, but also the concept of something like machine learning. Having access in a programmatic way to a digital concept of materials really can enable some of these ideas and thoughts about building out your information and parameters. So you'll see what's gone on here is it's fetched all of the files that we just imported, and it's calculating all of the relevant parameters that are of interest to us, and then it's adding them back into the files. See that we've just finished, and we can go ahead and take a look at these files again. If we just do a quick refresh or open up a new version of the file, what we'll see is that we have now added these parameters onto the record. We still have our original tensile curve preserving the integrity of the data, but we've now added our 0.2% offset yield stress, our Young's modulus, and our Ramberg-Osgood parameter onto here. But whatever types of information need to be calculated can be done easily because the data is accessible via a Python or a Python API. So we've gone through a part of the process. We have started with an existing material. We figured out how the device performs. Now we're in the process of validating and making sure that our materials are statistically rolled up and that they are controlled in the manner that we want them to be controlled. So what we're wondering now is how traceable is this process, right? So how traceable is this idea of making us be able to go from, our tensile tests up through to a statistical version. So we're going to analyze these results, and we're going to be able to publish this into a format that our end users have access to. So let's start with our tensile test data. We have 6 samples. We're going to use a tool called Mimat Analyzer to enable us to roll them up. But this is a tool that's a part of our platform, but it is something that could easily be done via Excel or Python, like I showed earlier. So just as a way of facilitating the analysis and displaying some of the results, we're going to use Mimat Analyzer. And then we'll take the statistical data, and that will be within our GrantMI database again. And we'll be able to look at the averages and then potentially give it over to our end users if we feel like it's appropriate. So let's start here. So what we're looking at right now are those 6 samples again that now we've calculated the relevant parameters. We've pulled all the information out. And what we want to do is create a statistical entry based on these 6 rolled up files. So what we do is we use Mimat Analyzer. And what this is going to allow us to do is do a number of calculations on all of the properties that have been calculated for these and create those statistical records and kind of measures of reference that are important to us. So if we go ahead and navigate down to this this company where we're going through our validation process for this new material, I take a look and I add my records to my analysis list, and then I want to run statistical calculations on it. What GrantMI will do is take all of the properties that exist and just calculate all of the statistical information, kind of base statistical information that's important to us, and then display, what these values look like. So again, this process is designed to enable you to build up this knowledge and build up this understanding with traceability in mind. So you see here that we have all of the parameters that we calculated, as well as some other details like gauge area, which was just associated with each of these individual records. And we can look at the variability via box plots of these various parameters. And if we identify that maybe one of these parameters is outside of the zone of what we expect, we can just dynamically deselect it and then actually look at how that will change the relevant parameters that exist, in this case for Young's modulus. And if we, see that it hasn't necessarily moved the numbers that much, we can add it back in. It's not really an outlier. It's just maybe a well-performing sample. And then we can take the statistical information and export it back into Granta. You'll also notice that this tensile response, we've automatically calculated a mean. There are a lot of ways within GrantMI to actually be able to create your own fit. So there is a possibility where if you wanted to do a different fit or a slightly modified fit compared to the mean, that's something we absolutely can facilitate. It's just dependent upon, again, how this data needs to be rolled up in this qualification process and how controlled we want to be about managing this and enabling the idea of kind of creating links and creating the process of digital transformation of going from individual batch or lot numbers up through tensile tests, up through this statistical rollup, and then ultimately to your end user. So if you see, we've exported it back into the database. We can take a look at the data sheet. We see that it now has our average curves. It also has the statistical information for all of the properties that we just calculated. And it also has the links back to our six constitutive tests. So if we go ahead and look at this within the database, and we just take a quick peek at this entry, you'll see that we actually, have the links to the tensile test data, and we also can have automatically created links to other parts of the database as well. So we've gone through this workflow of analyzing and going from 6 records down to 1. It's a process of rolling up our statistical data. The next phase, what we're just gonna talk through is there's also the ability in Grant MI to establish what's called version control, which means that when we want to publish this data to our end user, there's another step of permissions that enable us to go from this statistical data to design data. And this can really help us build out on our knowledge base. So the next phase is typically to enact something called version control to enable us to allow for our end users to have access to a very specific controlled version of this data. So in this case, I'm not necessarily going to walk through that, but this is something that's core to the idea of traceability and kind of digital transformation, is enabling you not only to build on your resources in regards to the data, but also the control of what data is used so that people are able to use the right data and the most consistent data format when designing and actually creating a part. And all of these are, of course, linked back together through a unified kind of corporate materials information hub, enabling, excuse me, us to map and understand the traceability that exists. So this is another part, right? So we've gone through this process. We've qualified a new material. We're ready for it to be used in design data, but we also want to make sure that we're not impacting the regulatory kind of burden that exists. And what we can do now, and typically this will be, could be somebody separate from within the engineering community, is run an analysis on a regulatory level of, does this product still meet my legislative requirements? And, are there substances that are used that are not compliant? And typically, for EU MDR, there's a very specific formula that we need to be able to capture. We need to look at the substance to material links, something that Granted does already, and something that's important is seeing, if I have a material, what is included in it. You need to be able to identify if there are substances that exceed a certain threshold. If there are none, then your device is compliant. If there are some, you have to define, is it in direct contact with the human body? And if that's the case, yeah, if that's not the case and it's not in contact, it is compliant. But if it is, there actually are punishments such that you have to redesign the device. There may be an alternative supplier that needs to be found. And there may have to be very specific labeling and kind of marketing information that has to be communicated. So by not understanding and seeing how this can affect a product, can lead to some pretty severe consequences in regards to actually being able to sell the device in the EU. So having the ability to do this easily and in line with your other processes is very critical to the concept of having a digital product or digital product development. So what we're going to look at now is something called Bom Analyzer, again, a product that exists within Granta. We're going to open up an assembly directly from within Bom Analyzer for our spinal implant, the same one that we showed earlier. And what we're going to do is we're just going to really quick run an analysis and make sure that it's compliant. So if I run that analysis right now, I see that there are some things that aren't compliant. In this case, it's my test blocks. And I know that the test blocks are just polymers that I put in to kind of map. So what I can do is actually remove those and then look at the analysis again to see, what is compliant and what is not compliant. So this is a bill of materials with my old producer in it. What I need to do now is actually add my new producer. So if I drag and drop that right into my rod, or the part of the database, or the part of the bomb rather, that is going to be used. Let me just jump back here. So I've dragged and dropped my new material into where it's going to be used. I've removed those test blocks, and what I'm going to do now is rerun my analysis to see if my bill of materials is compliant. So I'm going to check my bill of materials with all the materials in it and link them to the substances that are associated, and check against not only EU MDR, but a host of other legislations that are important to be able to manage and track. So if I rerun this analysis, we see that I am now compliant for REACH as well as EU MDR, as indicated by these check boxes. Again, there are a tremendous amount of legislations that we track, and what this digital product or process development enables us to do is quickly assess changes that may be necessary from an engineering level and see their impact, and then be able to generate reports related to a product's compliance. So if this is something that needs to be stored and managed and communicated to legislative bodies, by by building out this concept of digital product development and building out the idea of a material on a digital sense, we can easily and effectively manage this compliance information and justify it to whoever needs to have access to it. So now that we've assessed compliance, we're on to the last step of our workflow, right? Everything is good up until now. We need to see if from an engineering level, does my new material work in the same capacity as my old material? So can I validate this product performance for each new material lot, right? So we've done a tremendous amount to get to this point of building up our knowledge and understanding of materials in a digital level. But what we're going to do now is just show what an end user sees. So this is somebody who's just doing simulation or design. And what does the end user see from all that hard work? Their major impact is just picking the materials from a new source. They're able to have the benefit of all that traceability, all of that process and definitions already built in directly within their tool, built in directly within their interface, so that this concept of digital product development is not really foreign to them and works very effectively. So what we're going to do, the easiest way to bring this information in is go into this Grant MI gateway. It's a drop down, it's a browsing tree that lets you find materials or search for them directly. And then we're just going to select that we want to bring in our new material. And if we go ahead and select this material, it will import it directly into our simulation product and our project rather. So if we go ahead and take a look at this, we'll see that we now have our new material brought in. And one thing I want to point out to you is there is a number of identifiers that exist on every material brought in. This enables us to have that traceability level down to an exact version of the material. And using this number, we can communicate that to other products within the Ansys platform suite to be able to build on this traceability. So now that we've assigned this material, the last thing that we need to do is actually go ahead and go into our simulation product, assign it to the parts that are important to us, reminding ourselves of what the maximum deformation and stress are. What we're going to do now is go into our materials section or our geometry and assign the correct materials to our rod. In this case, we're changing from our old supplier to our new supplier. And as we go ahead and do that, what that's going to enable us to do is then rerun this simulation and just make sure that as we do this analysis, we can assess if our new material works on an engineering level. It's already gone through our entire material qualification process. It's gone through our compliance section. And if we go ahead and look at our results after we've just rerun the simulation, we see that my materials have been assigned. And if I go ahead and jump over to the solution, we can take a look at what the maximum deformation and stress are, and we see that they're pretty much the same. And because these definitions meet and are very similar to each other, we can say that our new material supplier's behavior is qualified and acceptable, and it's in line with our old material supplier. So what we've just done in terms of reiterating, we went from assigning a material initially, realizing we had to use another material, going through the entire material capture, qualification, analysis, version control to get it to the point where it could be used by an end user, used by somebody actually in our design or simulation community. Then we can actually run regulatory compliance using those same materials and that same information, and then bring it in and rerun the simulation to make sure and assess that the new material has the same properties and performance as the old one. And the question I would ask here is, how did we do this? We took in our proprietary materials information. We used workflows that already exist for qualifying and understanding a lot of devices. And we're able to build and bring this information in by having the concept of a digital material and building on the idea of digital transformation. And this is really helpful in maximizing on investments in regards to testing, qualification, and verification. So then how do we move forward from here, right? How do we capture this and bring it together? And that's where we use simulation process data management and a tool like Ansys Minerva to capture all these details and all these aspects of the process. And it's really easy to do. All we're going to do right now is jump into our Ansys Minerva tool. We're going to select the project that we've been working on this whole time, this three-part bend in a spinal implant. And we are going to run what we're calling an FDA report. This is a report modeled after what the FDA has said is a report of the future. And the idea here is we will take all of the parameters and details that are inherent to this project. We will run a simulation and we'll create a report that communicates the relevant information on an engineering sense, which a lot of times is what's important, but also will communicate the materials down to that GUID level that we showed earlier. So you can build on these processes, and by having these digital threads, weave together a fabric that connects the various parts of your process. So what we're doing right now is we're rerunning this simulation using Ansys Minerva that has all of the components associated with it, and we're really quickly and easily generating a report. And this report can be shared and communicated to people inside or outside your organization in regards to a number of different factors and ideas. So in this case, what we're looking at right now is if we jump over to this actual screw that we had just brought in, we can see that we have our materials assigned all the way down to the individual GUID level, as well as any sort of mechanical or engineering properties that are important. And if we scroll down, we see that we've actually captured 3D images that are CAD models of the actual device itself. We also have details about the system conditions, solving conditions, the mesh sizing. All of this detail is captured and communicated and is able to be represented in a design history file or whatever type of kind of report that is necessary to be able to qualify and build this product into the healthcare space. So these platform tools really help enable a lot of the key digital transformation capabilities. They lead to consistency, traceability, and reuse of data, as well as models and processes. They allow for insights to be driven through AI and other details because all of your information is on a digital level, and they're really just capitalizing and enforcing the idea of a digital transformation. So we're able to create this concept using platform tools to facilitate the idea of materials and medical devices in a truly digital space, and enabling them to kind of grow the concept of digital continuity, reducing risk in regards to not only component, subsystem, and system level, but as well as regulatory and other compliance type of details. So thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I really hope that if you have any questions or feedback, do not hesitate to reach out. I appreciate all of your time, and thank you very much for listening.